By 1966, a strong black and white trauma bonding psychological operation was at work, and losing one's mind to make sense of it all presented itself as the only option for a great majority, pushing the popular worldview further into satanic perspectives, undergoing spiritual possession and mind control on encompassing scales. So it would only make sense that the media joins in on the programming. In 1966, the fantasy genre started to, out of nowhere, explode. Adding to the space and alien programming, the popular show Star Trek was first aired, creating a subgenre culture within itself. The Batman show was also released, and grown men today in 2017 are still watching Batman. Space Ghost became an instant hit for the kids, and they always looking out for the kids. Oh, and the subtle and sexually suggestive game Twister came out for all the whippersnappers and partygoers, right around the time birth control was being more accepted and avidly pushed into cities and counties via Planned Parenthood. Interesting. 66 would also spawn the beginning of the Great Occult Revival, and solidifying in 1970, starting with the 66 foundation of the Church of Satan in San Francisco, formed by Crowleyite Anton LaVey. Many famous celebs would join this church, and many other cults and orders would pop up over the next few years, popularizing Crowley and his work, nearly bringing him back to life in a way. The Rolling Stones and the Beatles would have a great deal to do with this. Since they all were devout Crowley followers, they couldn't help but make Crowleyan material. They would push the Crowleyan philosophies through their art, weaponizing it and transforming the culture into something ugly, something sinister and ancient.
I remember when we first went in, one of the people said, "Who are you?" And Tex said, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." And I remember that in my conscience, it's so alive in me, even just recalling it. I remember that I had gone so far and there was no turning back. That even if I had wanted to run, even if I had wanted to leave, I couldn't. It was like I was caught in something that I had no control over. I had absolutely no say-so as to what was happening there. It was just like a tool in the hands of the devil is the only way I can put it.
By 67, Charles Manson steps on the scene, and yes, directly tied to the CIA, somewhat of a monarch assassin / handler, very educated in hypnotism, Scientology, and the manipulative use of LSD, which he was generously supplied with via secret intelligence cells in the Bay Area. He took up residence in Berkeley and wandered the streets learning the area and its people. This is where he found the Scientology spin-off cult, Process Church, where he would eventually recruit minions to form his later famed Manson family. And not at all surprising, Manson came directly out of the Beat Generation movement and was now a hippie, indulging in LSD and pretty much whatever else he could get his hands on. Dark things were manifesting in the counterculture, and by design. Psychedelics were the mainstay and literal engine of youth at this time. The Human Beaten would be the pre-Woodstock event that officially established the culture, put on by Leary by way of mysterious drug scene guru John Starr Cook through Agent Sherman Kent, right-hand man of the illustrious Alan Dulles. Everybody who was anybody attended the Human Be-In Festival in 1967, and I imagine little did any of them know that the CIA was behind the entire function. It brought together all the new left free speech and anti-war rabble-rousers of Berkeley with the stoner tech brats of Stanford that would later bring us the internet and the personal computer through Stewart Brand, the go-between of LSD and the internet. It brought all of the liberal counter-establishment crews and broods to the same floor to bathe in drugs and free love, fantasize about changing the world and reaching a higher state of being. Babylon Rising, the dream before the nightmare. It's interesting how the Summer of Love, which was during this year in 1967, appeared to give the culture a moment of sincere and genuine happiness, a drug-induced victory of sorts, a sense of accomplishment, a brief and imagined accomplishment and happiness, that is. 68 would erase all of that and start the very beginning of the end of a cultural movement. By 1968, the psychedelic movement had hit a crescendo. In the spirit of Huxley, Wasson, and Leary, Carlos Castaneda, the next agent of psychedelic propaganda, became famous with his peyote-painted Don Juan novel series. An anthropologist and protege of Gordon Wasson, Castaneda was featured in, again and as always, Time magazine, and labeled the godfather of the new age. Probably the most significant of the MK Ultra projects of drugging society through creating cultures that survive on drugs was the book written by Tom Wolfe, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which single-handedly created an entire new and fresh movement of first-time LSD users and supporters. Though LSD was illegal in many areas by '66, this piece of literature made it a god. Laws and regulations had no meaning at this point. The Dark Age was here. Things were getting more debased, more sexual. Music was getting darker and twisted. The black metal genre was growing, and even black metal glam rock was surfacing. This homoerotic, androgynous, yet gothic and witchy music that was littered with Crowleyism, and its authors were open Crowleyites.
I fell into the trap of the black magic, Kabbalism, and the whole idea of just the Crowleyism of the times, and I really got completely disoriented by all that.
Rosemary's Baby came out this year in '68, setting the tone for the following year to come, birthing the Crowleyan crowned and conquering child. At the same time this year, and assisting in the domestic Phoenix project of social terrorism, the serial killer operations were brewing, beginning most significantly with the Zodiac killings. The Zodiac who had happened to be terrorizing the San Francisco Bay Area, home of the counterculture. Though this terrorized mainly the silent majority and bystanders of the current psycho cult of drugged and doomed rebel squads that ranged between 16 and 30 years old, just as planned. And this surely didn't stop the spread of counterculture doctrine and mind control. As the Esalen Institute became more popular, and celebs like Allen Ginsberg and Alan Watts continued to peddle their spiritual poison to the masses of foolishly curious followers, the New Age was taking its full form. But it needed a span of events to crack and dismantle any residual of modernity or morality left in society. And this started with the killing of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. If there was ever an official moment or beginning to the end, it was now. The civil rights movement would take on a violent and devastating turn, and whatever hope that was left in a stable country and balanced social climate was gone. 1969 would finally put a fork in it all, and the dazed and confused counterculture had no idea what was getting ready to hit them. 1969, the cancerous Ouroboros, eating itself by nature, with all its occult meaning within the numbers and matching rituals that followed during its reign, would surely be a 12-month period to remember. This year was one people call not only an end of a decade, but an end of an era. The final socio-psychological split in spiritual possession would take place during this time. The finale of finales before the age of Aquarius, the dawn of Janus, and New Age movement that would take its establishing seat in 1970. Rounding out the full debasement of American culture and the utter destruction of righteousness and Christian morale that kept society together. The new left movements of liberation and weaponized human rights injected postmodern ideals into this new world. Babylonian doctrines outweighed biblical understanding, and seared consciences overruled the poor righteous teachers. Drugs, free love, and unabated reckless sexuality warped the rationale of a country, and these habits and lifestyles were spreading across the earth via media and entertainment. As it always does, and by design in its success. So to fulfill this journey and take the 70s into a completely deeper and darker realm of spirituality, 1967 had to be momentous and devastating. Reality had to be shaped and shattered within a single blow. Fantasy, tragedy, unrest, and wonder had to be rolled out consecutively in just the right order to topple humanity once and for all, and lay the proper groundwork to bring in a floundering new age and brave new world. 1969 was very eventful, to say the least. To continue in the space race propaganda of NASA and spirit of Crowleyite John Whiteside Parsons, many know him as Jack Parsons, father of NASA via his pan-deity inspired and alchemic jet propulsion lab, the moon landing psyop was unleashed on the damaged and shaken American people. Apollo 11 on July 16th, which is 7-7 in numerology. An evoking ritual and psychological operation wrapped in one, playing on the imagination and wonder that presented itself plenty, and as would to be expected, especially after receiving so much trauma over the previous several years. The American people were looking for any excuse to be taken away and blasted off into what could be, since what wasn't appetizing. People were hungry for escape. Nixon came in office as president, a lifetime actor and character I believe Trump is being designed after, would soon end dollar convertibility to gold, and even further deepen the welfare state and socialist empire by broadening the Great Society social programs of Lyndon B. Johnson. The Stonewall riots would occur, right in time for the wild 70s and soon Studio 54 era. These riots birthed the gay rights movement, propping up the secret Skull and Bones creation, the Mattachine Society, of NAMBLA advocate and gay rights guru Harry Hay, and of course San Francisco's own Milk to follow. The Baphomet spirit was in the midst. At the same time, Jack Kerouac would die, ending officially the remnant of the Beat generation that had now morphed into an LSD and heroin-ridden band of knuckle-dragging hippies, yogis, and outlaws. Another huge blow this year would be the assassination of prominent Black Panther Fred Hampton, officially ending the Black Panther movement of Black liberation. Soon we will see the conversion of the focused, militant, and socially concerned Black culture into a smooth operating, jive spitting, lady pimping, and perm dripping culture of sin and debauchery, ushered in by a dubious character indeed, Time Life magazine photographer, CIA operative, and film director Gordon Parks. But we will save his story for the 70s. And as always, Hollywood would play a key role in making the counterculture the staple culture of the period, with the degenerate drug dealer and rebel hero film Easy Rider, which was released in the early summer. Like Shaft would birth the pimp and hoe and flash and dough culture, Easy Rider made the anti-establishment stoner and outcast cool, sexy, and heroic, all in the guise of a compelling and persuasive script, amazing acting, and a twisted, catchy ending, as usual. Next was the culture-shocking and society-transcending incident of the Manson family murders that occurred the same summer, 1969. August 9th, the same day the Haunted Mansion opened at Disneyland, several miles away. The same year Marilyn Manson, the death metal musician, was born. Oh, but these are all just probably coincidences, right? Mixed with the Zodiac killings, the assassinations and untimely deaths, the new potentials of space travel and a concurrent bloody war overseas, 1969 had presented itself as a nail-studded baseball bat in mid-swing. So to continue in this fear and pleasure, masochistic type of narrative, of course a hedonistic and mind-blasting event had to be presented. And literally days after the Manson murders, the Central Intelligence-funded and organized Woodstock mass doping project was opened, bringing the largest mass of human bodies together during what some would say was one of the most tragic and destabilizing moments in history, as a joined unit to dissociate and bury somewhere deep within the subconscious the everlasting pains and absorb the tainted, bad acid and mind-altering drugs as test rats for the biggest socio-psychological science project ever produced. Woodstock, subproject of MK Ultra, sex, drugs, and mysticism. The Dionysian pleasure trough made specifically for the useless eaters to detach and frolic. Just as the human potential movement of Huxley, the native revival of Wasson, and the weaponized anthropology of Bateson would have it, whom all worked in the spirit of Aleister Crowley, who used the same drugs, sex, and music in his workings and rituals before all of this. The great work was at hand. To officially end the era and steal the imagined success of the hippie culture in Woodstock, and to square away the decade, the Rolling Stones attempted to throw a West Coast version of the event, known as the Altamont, held at the Altamont Speedway in Northern California in December 1969. After a decade of strife, too much pleasure, too much drugs, and not enough moral guidance, the counterculture hit a wall at Altamont. To start, it was secured by the CIA drug and prostitution running organization, the Hells Angels. Paid with LSD and alcohol, they secured the 3-foot stage with knives and pull sticks. Similar to the way Rome fell, Altamont demonstrated an excellent example of climax within hedonistic movements. Violence played throughout the entire event. Overdoses and tragedy marked it with despair. By the end, 4 people had been murdered. One man even had a gun and was stabbed to death by the Hells Angels right in front of the stage. When you realize the Stones, supporters of the Satanic Process Church, devout Crowleyites, and the Hells Angels as security, more drugs than one could pack in a merry prankster school bus, and thousands of beaten, lost individuals made up the body of this event, it is easy to see what type of spirit was holding all of this together. After the Altamont concert, the counterculture as it was known was officially dead, like Sharon Tate, Fred Hampton, King, both Kennedys, and Kerouac. And the establishment had the next set of events and institutes to guide these lost and beat souls into preceding levels of consciousness. The new age of cults and gurus, neo-paganism, blaxploitation, and self-indulgence. The giant leap from the counterculture we generation to the 70s Babylonian me generation that would bring us right into the 80s MTV generation. Newer drugs, newer fads, and personalities, yet same worldview, and dark spirit holding it together like a glue. Beginning with 1970, the moral fabric of America was officially torn. The hive mind was shattered, and now full-on dissociation would set in.
Everybody grows up with different morals according to their culture. Okay, when you take acid, your mind expands beyond these moral characteristics and your concepts of right and wrong. So you step out beyond those bounds, and when you step out beyond those bounds, the imagination begins to take over. And the imagination can be a very deceitful thing. It's a fantasy. And when you take acid, you go out beyond that. You think you're coming back to where you started from. Originally, you don't. And every time you drop acid, you get a little bit further away from reality. And I took so much acid that I just was what I would term spaced. And it took me many years to what I term now re-enter. And that was just through not having any acid and having to deal with reality every day.